So how do you actually know if the saw sitting behind those paint cans in your garage is one of these hidden treasures, or if it's genuinely just a hunk of rusted scrap metal waiting for the dump? Let me walk you through this step by step, because the difference between throwing away $20 of junk and accidentally tossing out a $1,000 machine often comes down to about 5 minutes of careful looking, and almost nobody takes the time to actually do it properly, which is exactly why so many of these saws end up at landfills instead of in a collector's workshop where they belong. The very first thing you need to do, before you touch anything else, before you even think about starting it or cleaning it up, is find the model number, because that number is going to be the single most valuable piece of information you have access to, more valuable than any guess, more valuable than what your uncle told you 30 years ago, more valuable than what it looks like at a glance. On most old saws from this golden era, that model number is stamped directly into the metal itself, not printed on some flimsy sticker that peeled off decades ago, but actually pressed into the casing so it survives rust, grime, sun damage, and years of neglect sitting in a damp shed. You'll typically find it on the crankcase, sometimes on the recoil starter housing where you pull the cord, and other times down near the base of the handle where your hand would naturally rest while cutting. Take a rag, wipe away as much of that built-up grime and old oil residue as you can, and look closely, because sometimes that number is faint, sometimes it's partially worn away, and sometimes it's hiding under 40 years of dust that nobody has bothered to clean off since it was last used. Once you find it, write down both the brand name and that exact number, because this combination is what you're going to use later when you start researching actual sold prices instead of guessing at value. Now, once you've got that number recorded, move on to step 2, which is checking the material the saw is actually made from. And this is honestly one of the fastest ways to separate a genuinely valuable vintage machine from a worthless modern knockoff sitting in your garage pretending to be old. Pick the saw up with both hands and pay attention to what your body is telling you. If it feels surprisingly heavy, if it feels solid and cold and dense in a way that modern plastic tools, there's a very good chance you're holding something built from magnesium or aluminum alloy, which was the standard construction material during that legendary muscle saw era. Manufacturers were racing each other to build the toughest, most powerful machines on the market rather than the cheapest ones they could push through a factory line. That weight in your hands is not a flaw. It is not something to complain about. It is actually one of the clearest signals of authenticity and quality that you can physically feel without any tools or research at all. On the other hand, if the saw feels light, if it feels hollow, if it's clearly constructed mostly from plastic housing with minimal metal components, you're probably looking at a modern homeowner-grade saw or a later-era budget model that simply doesn't carry the same collector interest. And that's fine to know early, because it saves you the time of getting your hopes up over something that was never going to be worth much in the first place. Step 3 is where things get genuinely serious, because this is the stage where the real money is either won or completely lost, and it comes down to assessing completeness and overall condition with total honesty rather than wishful thinking. Take a careful look at whether the original guide bar is still attached to the saw, because bars get lost, swapped out, or thrown away far more often than people realize, and a saw missing its original bar immediately loses a significant chunk of its potential value to a serious buyer. Check whether the chain is still present, even if it's dull, rusted, or clearly unusable in its current state, because completeness matters more than functionality at this stage of evaluation. Look closely at the decals, the branding badges, and the small model tags that would have originally been affixed to the housing, and ask yourself honestly whether they're still intact and still readable, because peeling or completely missing decals can quietly cut a saw's value down significantly compared to an identical model that kept its original branding intact through the decades. Here's the part most people never think about, though. A complete saw, one with its original bar still attached, its decals still legible, and reasonable compression in the engine, can realistically be worth 5 to 10 times more than a stripped-down, seized-up hulk of the exact same model sitting 2 towns over, even though technically they're the same machine that rolled off the same factory line decades ago. That's how dramatically condition swings the numbers in this hobby, and it's why 2 people can own the identical model and end up with wildly different outcomes when they finally decide to sell. Speaking of that engine, step 4 is a simple compression test you can do right now without any special tools, without taking anything apart, and without any mechanical expertise whatsoever. Grab the starter cord, the same one you'd normally pull to start the engine, and give it one slow, steady, deliberate pull rather than yanking it hard and fast the way you might if you were actually trying to start it. Pay close attention to what you feel. If there's real resistance, if you feel a firm pushback against your hand partway through the pull, that's a genuinely encouraging sign that the engine still has some life left inside it, that the internals haven't completely seized or rusted solid, and that a rebuild down the line is realistically possible rather than a total write-off. Now, here's an important truth that a lot of people get wrong when they're evaluating these old machines, and it's worth sitting with for a second. A saw that fires up, runs smoothly, and actually cuts wood is, without question, worth the most money to the widest range of buyers, because functionality always commands a premium in any collector market. But please don't make the mistake of assuming that a saw which doesn't run is automatically worthless, because that assumption alone has caused countless people to scrap machines that were secretly quite valuable. Plenty of dedicated collectors specifically seek out non-running saws, either because they enjoy the restoration process itself as a hobby, treating it almost like restoring a classic car, or because that particular seized-up model contains rare internal parts that are otherwise nearly impossible to find for other saws in their collection that need repair. So that dead, rusted, solid old machine sitting silently in the corner of your garage that you assumed was destined for the scrap pile might actually be exactly the piece some collector across the country has been quietly searching for over the past several years. Now that you've actually gone through and evaluated what you have sitting in front of you, the next logical question becomes where you actually go to sell it, and more importantly, where all of these mysterious collectors keep coming from in the first place. Because this underground community I keep referencing throughout this video is completely real, and it's honestly far more organized than most outsiders would ever expect. There are dedicated reference communities built specifically around this hobby, complete with detailed guidebooks written by longtime collectors who have spent decades cataloging models, tracking historical production numbers, and documenting realistic value ranges. There are active international forums where enthusiasts from different countries compare notes, share photos of recent finds, and occasionally spark genuine bidding wars in the comment sections over particularly rare or well-preserved models that rarely surface on the open market. And there are large, active social media groups with thousands of dedicated members who spend their free time trading, buying, selling, and proudly showing off their latest garage or barn discoveries to an audience that actually understands and appreciates what they've found, which is honestly a rare thing in most other corners of the internet. This is where the real prices actually get established, not through some random guess or a hopeful listing price, but through actual transactions between people who genuinely know what they're looking at. And it's exactly where a saw you personally assumed was worthless garbage might finally find a buyer who has been actively hunting for that specific model for years without any luck. One quick word of caution before you get too excited about shipping something off to a buyer 3 states away though, because these old saws tend to be heavy, and they're often still soaked in decades-old oil and fuel residue that never fully evaporated, which makes packaging and shipping them a genuine logistical headache for both the seller and the buyer. That's a big part of why so many transactions in this particular hobby happen locally instead, at organized swap meets and dedicated collector gatherings where buyers can physically inspect a machine, test that compression themselves, and hand over cash on the spot rather than dealing with freight costs and the risk of damage during transit, which conveniently loops us right back around to that shed sitting in your own backyard where this entire search began. And here's the final twist to all of this, the one detail that catches almost everyone completely off guard the first time they hear it, and it's something worth remembering every single time you're tempted to a piece of old equipment purely by its appearance. The saws that look the most worthless on the surface are sometimes secretly the most valuable of the entire bunch, and there's a very logical reason behind that seemingly backwards pattern. A crusty, odd-looking old machine that a casual seller at a yard sale would happily toss onto a folding table with a $20 price tag, assuming nobody in their right mind would want it, can actually turn out to be a genuinely rare model that a dedicated collector would quietly and happily pay several $100 for without hesitation, precisely because so few surviving examples of that particular model made it through the decades intact. Think about it logically for a moment. The ugly ones, the unloved ones, the models that nobody thought at the time, were the ones that got carelessly thrown away by the thousands over the years. while the flashier or more popular models were more often preserved, restored, or passed down carefully. That imbalance is exactly what drives scarcity, and scarcity, more than almost anything else in this hobby, is what ultimately drives real collector prices upward over time. So here's the bigger picture worth sitting with as we wrap this up. Manufacturers are simply never going to build machines like these again, not with the same magnesium casings, not with the same fully buildable engine designs, not with that entire all-metal muscle saw philosophy that defined an entire era of American and international manufacturing. That world has genuinely disappeared, quietly replaced instead by sealed plastic housings and a modern culture of planned obsolescence where products are engineered to be discarded rather than repaired. And here's the part that should really motivate you to act rather than procrastinate. Every single year that passes, more of these old surviving machines get accidentally scrapped, thrown away, or lost to neglect, which means the ones that manage to remain intact only become rarer, and consequently more valuable, with each passing year. So before you haul that dusty old chainsaw out to the curb this weekend or drop it off at your local dump without a second thought, take just 2 or 3 minutes out of your day to actually find that stamped model number, wipe away the grime, write it down, and then go look up completed, actually sold listings for that exact model, rather than trusting inflated asking prices that never found a real buyer. You genuinely might be about to throw away $100 without realizing it. Or, depending on what you're actually holding, you might be about to throw away a full $1,000 sitting quietly in your own hands. So go check your shed properly this time, dig through the back corners of your garage, and if you've got access to your grandfather's old barn or storage shed, it's absolutely worth a careful look too, because the hidden treasure you've been walking past for years might have genuinely been sitting there in plain sight the entire time, patiently waiting for someone to finally notice it. And if you found any part of this genuinely useful today, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because next time around, the hidden fortune we uncover together might not be a chainsaw at all. It might be something else entirely sitting quietly in your garage right now that you've never once thought twice about.